Hey buddies, welcome to AmassGames. My name is Simon. I'm here with Alex Abraham today. How are you, Alex?
I'm doing all right.
Fantastic. So, just to let you know, my webcam is just off to the side slightly. That's just to make sure we've got a few things going on. So, Alex has reached out. Alex has found out the channel. He found about this massive spreadsheet that he's just been informing me about that he found me on, which I am aware I am on. It's very difficult to get off it, to be honest. He found me to be very fast to respond. It's GMT +2 where Alex is. If you've seen any of my table talk stuff before, we're going to be talking about briefly some questions, 22 or so. I would love to ask initially if in terms of these time zones where I can try and predict where Alex is in the world presently, and then talk about an upcoming tabletop role-playing game that's coming to Kickstarter, and it's set in the world of Alaria. And if you're interested in RPGs, if you like sandboxes, I know I like sandboxes in particular. It's a co-op as well for, I believe, 2 to 4 players. We'll have a demo of it again today. If you're interested, make sure you check out the links. There'll be updates going on in relation to obviously when that Kickstarter is going live. Lots of people are very interested already. We've got some nice hardcore followers. And again, you can either be one of those or just someone who generally follows and wants to back. So hopefully you find that of interest. Alex also has a background in public speaking, which sounds incredible. So I'd like to hear more about this. Alex, so firstly, whereabouts in the world are you, may I ask, approximately, or however you put it?
So I very much am a traveler, right? Right now, I'm in South Africa.
Wow, cool.
So I was born a South African citizen and a U.S. citizen, so I was a dual citizen from
Cool.
birth. But in a few months' time, I will be going to do my PhD in China, which is a completely different story. So and that's why I wanted to get this Kickstarter off the ground now, so that because I'm not going to really have time to engage with social media very much when I'm beneath, Chinese government. That's
Yeah,
how it is.
absolutely, yes. Full into role playing mode when you get there. So,
Yep.
I wanted to ask, what have you been up to in terms of what games, not only just tabletop role playing games, but tabletop games in general that you might be able to chime in with in relation to obviously the audience. So, do you have any favourites in particular?
So I got into tabletop role-playing games, right? With Pathfinder First Edition, right? It was the very first role-playing like tabletop RPG that I played, and after like a little bit of like fumbling about with like understanding what it is and not really getting help from my DM, who I just ended up reading all of the manuals and like all of the rules and all of the classes like from beginning to finish. And then I sort of realized there's a lot of depth to the system, and there's a lot of flexibility, and there's a lot of things that you could do with it, right? And so that was my. I understand that a lot of people got into this with D&D, right? And well, Pathfinder is first edition was close to 3.5, but it was like more like 3.75, something like that. But I was taken aback by the flexibility of the system, and I was taken aback by the amount of things you could do and the stories that you could tell, right? And I thought, hey, this is going to be a passion of mine. I then proceeded to run Pathfinder campaigns, first edition, and then second edition for the next 5 years, averaging one session a week for, yeah, 5 years, not even stopping during summer. And I think over that time, think I've like run maybe 5 years. Yeah, like around 300 games in total.
Fantastic. Do you have a
Yeah.
favourite edition of D&D and also a favourite class, even a favourite rule that you've come across that's been really memorable?
So my oh, okay. Pathfinder First Edition is always going to be like have a place in my heart, but the the D&D edition that I like, that I think suits its purpose of like D&D more, right, is 5e, because there's enough flexibility in the system and it's simple enough to be accessible for everyone on there, right? Pathfinder First E, if you play it long enough and if you play it with very experienced people, they sort of leave your new players in the dust, right? If you get them joining, because there's so much depth to the system and they're on a steep learning curve to get up to that point. And so, like, when you're trying to play and share a game with friends, and you're seeing these people who've played this game for 5 years, and you're trying to bring in new people who've never played D&D before, don't even know what this is about, it's not the system for that. D&D 5e is closer to that.
It's so flexible, 5e in particular. It feels like a broccoli head, just the way like the nature elements and stuff like that. It's been very open.
As that said, Pathfinder 2e I think is more promising potentially than D&D 5e. The problem that I see Pathfinder 2e having thus far, at least when I was looking at it in the beta and I ran my own campaign with it, is that while it does a lot of amazing stuff and it's a very like simple system to get behind, and all of the stuff is nicely laid out, the mechanics work very elegantly, the characters don't look quite different enough, right? It's like the barbarian and the fighter, they feel like they have access to the same options, and then they get like extra utility on top of that, but they don't feel as different as like a barbarian or fighter in 5e or Pathfinder First Edition.
Yeah.
And I hope that this changes with time as more content gets added to the system and it becomes fully saturated and it goes lots of different ways. But for now, I'm not running Pathfinder 2e because I'm waiting for that to happen.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's almost as if, how can you create something new when, I think the saturation is great there, whereby you've done that, okay, but it's going to be similar to something else, and making sure we do something. So in terms of Kickstarter, why crowdfund? Why Kickstarter in particular? Maybe what led you to go down that pathfinder, shall we say?
Suggestion, right? And seeing a lot of other tabletop RPGs on there like this, and also me not necessarily wanting to be with a publisher, right? So there's multiple different reasons for me not wanting to be with a publisher, right? One of the things is that this publisher understands that they're going to be going up against Paizo and Wizards of the Coast, right? So this is high fantasy D&D roleplay, right? Right. You're going to need to have a lot of faith in the person that you're putting behind this project in order to support this kind of project, right?
Yeah.
Now, while a ton of my friends have a lot of faith, especially the people who I've DM'd for have a lot of faith in me, it's a little bit weirder to go to a publisher and say, hey, I have this huge document, I have this idea, I'm this kind of person, but I don't have a public face, right? And I don't have a history of record of this so far. So, right, it's going to be hard to convince them to leap on this and like dedicate resources to this. So I've done all of that myself. I've hired my own writers. I've hired my own artists. I've reached out to a bunch of media people, such as yourself, and I'm doing it all myself as my own project manager. Then after I want to do it, I want it to be community rather than publisher owned.
Yeah. Okay.
So one of the things that we saw with D&D recently was Wizards of the Coast and the OGL and all of that fiasco, right? It came to my idea that a lot of different publishers, right, could do this sort of thing, right? We can put our fingers at Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast all day if we want to, right? But let's say that there's eventually a change of guard with Paizo and new people come up, or a different publishing press, right? Who's to say that they won't try the same thing in the future with a system that I make, right? But maybe 10 years down the line, 20 years down the line, it's evolved into something great, and lots of people start using it, and then they throw that, they get greedy, and I end up with all of these problems. That was not originally my intent. And now I'm far away from the project, so I don't really have any input to it.
Yep.
So I would like it to be more community owned, similar to, like, I guess, are you familiar with Steam Greenlight?
Yep. And just coming on to Hasbro, I would say that they emailed me today, actually. So, yeah, that's a whole other matter. But there's other people who are keen to do Wizard of the Coast elements of them, obviously getting licensing in for D&D and stuff like that. So please tell us more, though, about Greenlight.
So like I guess our Greenlight, right, it's a Steam regulated platform, of course, right, and there's some limitations on what you can put on there, but in general, it is a platform for crowd like crowd support on the
Yep.
Steam platform. They basically people are allowed to put up presentations of projects onto the Steam Greenlight, and then after it gets a certain amount of like I guess traction on there, then Steam sort of goes ahead and potentially right makes it a crowd-funded program, and there that way right we can have sort of a community-led initiative into what kinds of games we want to make, what kinds of games we want to play,
Yep.
right? And just looking at the RPG community, right? Seeing as so many people getting behind, right? Stopping the OGL thing from changing, we have a strong community, right? And we have a strong enough community to be self-governing at times.
What do you think about things like Chat GTP for the likes of role playing and things like that? Do you have any views on that?
I think it definitely has quite a bit of potential. That said, whether or not it takes the optimal choice is right. The my thoughts about it, right? So, for
Yeah.
example, if ChatGPT is well, right there, right, it's going to come with a even-handed, right, knowledgeable approach to everything, right? That's not necessarily what role playing is about.
No.
Sometimes it's playing that stupid character. Sometimes it's playing that hot-headed. Sometimes it's playing that that lawful good and naive paladin,
Yeah.
right? It's role playing is not about making the most optimal decision all of
It's
the
the
time by
memories.
choice,
Yeah.
right? And so if ChatGPT works into a bunch of different personalities to it, then go ahead. But for now, right? I mean,
For the
playing
skeleton for
optimally
what it
is
is, yeah, and then
yeah.
obviously then you create your characters based on that. So in terms of um, going through some of other elements, which I think I could ask you, do you have that funniest moment that you've had in one of your sessions that you can recall,
Oh,
or one that recently one maybe I don't know.
okay. So there's one of the funniest times, right? That I was doing. So I was leading a somewhat experienced party through one of my Pathfinder sessions, right? And this was, I think, yes, this was season 6. And it was a right. It was a sort of a dual party system campaign. Basically, it was a team subtle and team like I guess beat 'em up, or if they call themselves Adobe PDF, it was some weird thing. Anyways, right? I for their first session, Team Subtle, right, was sort of put in charge of stopping, right, this tyrant, right, this devil tyrant from well, causing problems in this village, right? Well, it's a little bit weird, right? Because this is the first session, and the PCs are all level 5, right? And this devil, which is an ice devil, and it is CR 13, right? And I give them access to like a bunch of like weird different abilities, and they make this extremely convoluted like ambush plan from this nearby building that they're crossing that they know their devil is going to be parading by on a cart. They get a very lucky paralysis, right, on the devil, who's still defending itself by what do you call it? Like spell-like abilities, which you can use while being paralyzed. It's building ice walls around itself, and then they all just jump into the cart, and they like just it becomes this weird arena with these ice walls enclosed, and everybody fights to the death. Half of the party is bleeding out at the end, but in the end, that paralysis arrow saves them like from that entire thing. And so yeah, and then at the end, it's left to the one person standing, which is the Inquisitor, doing untrained heal checks to try to stabilize the rest of the party.
Wow. So I can give you I'll give you my one, and it's much
Yeah.
quicker. But basically, there's a character. She's been playing. I think she's from Brazil, and she's been playing about 5 years. and her character got killed off, and basically she goes, oh, and then she kind of just unzips her skin, and out pops her daughter, and she goes, I will avenge my mother, like that. So yeah, quite memorable in that respect as well. Cool.
Uh, yeah, so that's, I guess, one of the combat ones. I remember, in terms of like role play, right? My favorite one is actually when there was a backstabbing in the party, right? And basically, this evil cleric teleported them off of to the abyss, right in front of the right. This evil cleric was party owned, and they teleported them to the abyss. Right in front of their stronghold of their master. Then then they offered them to their master. The gunslinger proceeded to name bullet one shot the evil cleric, right? But this was in front of this was in the abyss, in front of everything that was happening. This was like their holy spot. So they leave the abyss. They come out, right, and afterwards, right? So the general and General Stoneguard, which was who the cleric served, like the super high level outsider god deity thing, followed them back, right? Wanted to ask the party to a parley, right? And then demanded that the person who shot his cleric marry him.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Interesting.
So that was an interesting kind of role play there. But
Yeah.
yeah.
So I remember one of my worst roleplay things. I don't know if you've ever like method acted, but I basically played someone who got humiliated by and beaten up by a cop, and yeah, it was I was almost in tears because I just got into the role too much. Which leads us on to what do you mop up tears with? Sand and sandboxes. So let's now talk about Alaria. You're going to give me a demo. I have got up in front of my screen, you're aware of this as well, obviously the overview. Obviously to my right hand side you've got actually the 126 pages. I don't know if that's fully available for everyone else, but I will have links through as and when things are available for people to go through. But yeah, I don't know if you want to get straight into that demo, or if you'd like to please give us that overview and what everyone will be getting up to, and duration, anything like that.
Okay, so I'll first talk about the project overview, right?
Sure.
And sort of what the project aims to address, because this actually ties very well into the previous topic, which is Pathfinder, right? So one of the reasons why I thought about making my own system is because over time I sort of started to grapple with the limitations, right, of a system like Pathfinder, like D&D, right? There was one time distinctly that stands out among the rest, right, where my players, right, wanted to have demanded of me, right, as the DM, to have like a 10-player session. 10-player session. They were all maybe level 16.
Okay.
Right? Us. Right? So you typically know how this is going to go already, sort of sounding like it. Right? I wanted to have some kind of engaging combat. Right? I wanted to have like a decent stories and plot hooks. Right? And the stories and the plot hooks went all right. Right? It was a little bit slower. Right? And a few other things. But the combat was literally just a grind fest. Right? Literally just a grind fest that took 30 minutes to go around the table. Right? There was only maybe a total of 20 to 30 characters, right, in total on the board at any given time, right? And they were pretty high level, but literally the combat took 2 hours, in the most basic sense, and it was 2 to 3 rounds, right? This is, and I realized that this is not how Pathfinder should be played, right? But I thought of it as more of a limitation of what changes could I make to make this actually enjoyable, to make everybody else here like actively participate when other people are taking their turns? How could I speed up this combat to make it more interesting, more almost storytelling aspect, like more about the decisions people make and less rolling dice and like waiting for a chance and other things to happen that are probably going to happen anyway, because if this character fails, then this other character is going to try to go ahead and they're going to succeed, right? what what can I do to make this combat, right, more engaging, and how can I bring out the story, right, and the decisions, right, that people are making and the way that they affect everything into, how do I breathe life into this combat,
Yeah.
because it's not here, right? And I understand that a lot of people don't play role playing games for the combat, right? And I absolutely like understand why, right? Because a lot of role playing games don't have like very engaging combat, right, when compared to right, well, like I guess a lot of tactical games or a lot of RTSs or fighting games or like like the other genres out there, right? Um, every time I come in, like I get one of like my person who's like familiar with video games, right, onto the combat, right? They're like, I don't really know what to do. Things are just moving so slowly, right? Especially with attention span, right? And like it's like, why do I have to take this my turn, right, and then wait 20 minutes for other people to do their things? And maybe I throw a d20 sometime to like save against an effect, but otherwise they're just checking a static number, right? So like I don't know, where's the interactivity in this, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's for first, I guess, my limitation on that. The second limitation that I was thinking of is like um the characters. How many characters is it reasonable, and how big of a party size is it manageable?
Yeah.
I thought about that 10-player game and understanding that, hey, how can I make this so that 10 players, or at least 10 different characters, are manageable by a DM, and that they don't all roll for perception, they don't all roll for, their own individual checks. How can I make this faster? How can I make this feel like a group? Right. So I thought about more about teamwork. I thought about more about mechanical execution, making things faster, making things more enjoyable for like everybody around, and making it feel like people were not doing things by themselves rather than the group as a whole. Because if everybody does things by themselves, then it's more like you're doing an RPG with one person 5 minutes, and you're doing an RPG with the other with someone else for another 5 minutes. You know the person of like, oh, the rogue sneaks by and in that tavern, right? And that stealth episode lasts a good 30 minutes, and the paladin's off, doing nothing, right? Literally.
Yeah. I've done that recently as well. So it makes absolute complete sense. I completely get on board with that as well. And it also, depending if you want to go fantasy or actually want to live the real world, there's not as much necessary fighting as well. So, and the luck you can get with it, it's not necessary for everyone, even though it's synonymous with D20. So how did you come up with Alaria? What was it particularly you thought, either the name or something about it that you thought, I really want to do this? We know about the Pathfinder elements. Obviously, it's a passion that you wanted to bring something specific. So let's talk about Alaria. Tell me more about, in your view, what it is and how you play it.
Okay, so Alaria, if I were to talk about the setting, right? So I actually had a good friend, right, who was very much into running, right, or writing fantasy and writing like sort of environments for tabletop games. In fact, she's DM'd, right, a few of our own custom like sort of systems. They're like a lot smaller, but she wrote up like a bunch of different lore and a bunch of different like settings and stories for all of these little games that she ran for like her friends, right? And this seems to be a pastime, right? And I'm very much more of like, well, my profession is science, right? I have a bachelor's in physics and a master's in chemistry, right? I am very much a systems and how things work kind of person, rather than someone who's solely on like the creative side and like imaginative side, right? I can see how a lot of things work together and intertwine, but I feel like I would spend a lot more time than she would coming up with a good setting and like good plots. So she decided to write this for me, right? And that's how we came up with Alaria, right? The Alaria, she gave me two prompts. I chose one of them. We filled it out. We kept filling it out. And then it is what it is now, right? But the system itself, right? I didn't have Alaria, right, which is a setting, until I think 6 months, right, ago. And the system itself is almost it's about 5 years old that I've been working on this, right? And I've been more, and so like in the first playtest was actually back into the old Pathfinder setting that I ran, right? Because I was thinking, hey, let's make some weird little mass combat rules for Pathfinder, right? And I was like, there's a lot of people are having a lot of fun with this.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more I could do with this, looking towards the end, right? So then, over the pandemic, right, I sort of was stuck in South Africa for quite a bit of time. And I thought, I think I'm going to continue working on this project, see what it fills out in how I can fill it out. Then I reached out to like a bunch of friends who had experience in a lot of different things, artwork, storytelling, and a bunch of other stuff. And they offered to do the parts of these things for me. They helped me for a bunch of times. And then I started like paying artists and everything. And it just sort of came together, right? That's how I ended up with Alaria. Right. The setting itself, I think, is pretty exciting. Right. It's a little bit traditional fantasy, right? Except with a lot of key elements here. Right. It's a very much isolated colony that dates back with a lot of emphasis on history and emphasis on social struggle, rather than struggle against, I don't know, an invading army or some kind of like nebulous evil bad god or kind of thing like that. There's a lot of exploration in it, and there's a lot of traditional art. There's a lot of traditional adventurer type things, but at the same time, those adventurer type people are there partly to get away from all of the social issues back home, right, and also to hopefully help them, right. So it's sort of like a Alaria is a place where there's a lot of, for lack of a better word, there's a lot of racism, right? There's a lot of prejudices, right? There's a bunch of class warfare to an extent, right? There is a government that doesn't really want to adapt to anything particularly, and then there's a lot of scholars who the government indirectly supports them, but they want to move things forward. They want to experiment with new technology, right, and new magical artifacts and things like that. Then you have all of these mob bosses and underground people who are feeding money into the government's pockets, but the government is trying to clamp down on them at the same time. And then, it's a city-state without any real enemies.
Okay.
And so it made itself into its own enemy to an extent, right? All of the different groups are vying for something, right? Some of them are working, some of them have other ideologies, and some of them are working towards the same goals, but they have different ways of doing that. And they would disagree with each other's, methods.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's a prosperous place, would you say?
I would say that it used to be prosperous, right? But there's, how do you say it?
It's kind of in decline, one way.
Yes, very much in decline. It used to be prosperous when there was space to expand.
Exactly, and now it's saturated.
Yeah, so like the population eventually grew to a point like population, wealth disparity, and a few other factors grew to a point where there's more of an internal struggle, and there's more with um, people having less or people having more, um, and then a lot of other like different prejudices that haven't been weeded
Yeah.
out yet that sort of came with its development.
Resource competition, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Okay, and you mentioned earlier, prior to this overview, a bit about obviously all the artists you paid for and stuff like that. In terms of this funding goal, are there stretch goals? Is there a certain goal you're looking to have in mind out of interest?
So there's a lot of different goals that I'm looking at, right? I've yet to make all of the stretch goals, right? But a few things there, right? This system has a lot of potential, right? At least from all of my testing on it. And I can make a lot of different stories of this. The more basic stretch goals would be um, more modules, more adventures that you can play with, right?
Hmm.
And then a lot more content in terms of the player, right? I guess player options that they can take, right? Character options, all of that kind of stuff. Then other stretch goals would be right, like miniatures, right? Custom miniatures, custom like decks of cards, which we can talk about like later in the game. Actually, I played with like a few different reviewers, and they said if I make one of the stretch goals, like just having a custom deck of cards, they will absolutely buy it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so yeah, that's going to stick with me. Then if I get to a point, right, where this is very successful, I might end up releasing the other setting that my writer came up with.
Excellent. I
Or
was wondering about that.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, I tried this sort of system with like more sci-fi elements to it, right? With more like automatic weapons, like you know the a different kind of setting, right? A less like fantasy, more right, futuristic sci-fi, even a little bit like steampunky at times, right? And it works for a lot of different things. I especially like people who are interested in tactics games really like the automatic weapons with how all of the action economy works because there was like a lot of interactivity with people trying to run behind cover to protect themselves from automatic weapons, but then shooting people with grenade launchers over their shoulder. But like, anyways, that's not in today's Kickstarter that
No,
we're
no, no.
talking about. But it's definitely a future plan that I have on if I am successful.
Okay, very, very exciting. And I mentioned earlier about that 5e miniatures. You know, they did really well, and that's
Yeah.
why I worked with them a bit on obviously the promotion of that one. So yeah, let's have a quick kind of demo. You know, it's just past the hour mark. Let's see. I don't know how long we've been recording actually, but I'm very keen to crack on with. Yeah, let's see if we can just have a bit of fun, have a few turns and rolls, whatever that might be, and tee it up for me, please.
Okay. What would you like for me to like sort of start on? Is there like a would you say like do you want to focus on how this system is a little bit different from like D&D, or would you like to like I've already explained a bit of the setting, right?
So I'm
Uh,
open. I mean, let's
okay.
assume there are people who haven't played D&D before. Maybe someone
Okay.
who maybe hasn't played a role-playing game before, and if it's easy to start at that higher level, then by all means they can obviously delve into it. But before I do that,
Yeah.
with your background, my background is actually in biology, but my hair is specifically styled like Sheldon. If you've watched The Big Bang Theory, so I don't know if you have, but it's
I
people
have.
say if you know anyone who have a bit of alcohol or potion in this setting, then they can see the similarity between myself and him. So yeah, there we go.
You're doing great role playing.
There you go, Bazinga. Thank you.
Yeah.
Right.
Anyways, so yes, for the person who's never gotten into like TTRPG before, or D&D or Pathfinder, I would say the same thing that I said the first time I laid eyes on the Pathfinder first edition. A TTRPG, right, or tabletop RPG. gives you so much more freedom, right? And it gives you a lot of, well, friends to play with at the
Yep.
same time. It's a social gathering, it's a game, it's a story, and it's all three things at the same time. And it's so flexible, right? And those, like, those four things, if you like, I guess, if those four things are what really drew me to them, especially their potential. It A lot of people have mixed experiences with tabletop RPGs for various reasons. Some people don't like their DM, right? Or don't have started out with a bad DM, didn't have a great time. Some people didn't like the combat. Maybe it was too slow for them. Maybe it was too clunky. Maybe there was too many numbers. Some people didn't like X, right? So yeah, I would advise you, give TTRPGs a chance, right? Find some friends who like to, I don't know, play dress up, play make believe to some basic thing. Find a DM who lets the players take the reins of the story, and then have fun, right? Pick a system that I think suits your group's interests a little bit more. If you don't like numbers and like crunching and planning, then don't pick one of the more crunchier ones. If you like sort of I don't know, just a story, then I mean you can start out with that one RPG that's called like Everybody is something. I forget. Everybody is like Bob. I forget what his name is. But the one where you're all different personalities in this own one person's head and each
Yeah.
fighting for control. Yeah. So yeah, it's a fantastic time. That's what I would say. Give them a chance. As for why you might well pick mine, right? One of the things that I'm going to say is that mine offers things a bit, right. Mine wasn't built for a particular experience, right? I will say, right. It wasn't built to tell a particular story, right? D&D and Pathfinder are sort of similar in that regards. They are both universal systems. But even if we go back to their original design. D&D is called Dungeons and Dragons. It was made to explore dungeons, right? It was made to fight dragons, right? And Pathfinder, right? It came out of D&D when it was already more of a universal system, right? And those, right? Those they come with that similar mentality. They've branched out to a much more adventure system, right? Mine, right? People have literally told me that you could play my game like a war game. You could play it like a tabletop RPG. You could play it just in role play, completely disregard combat. You could play it as well a sandbox where you can pick any of those options in order to achieve a certain objective.
Mm-hmm.
And then, well, if it's the combat is kept fast, right? The combat is kept fast for those people who don't like slow combat, which I think everybody would say that that's a good thing, right? Keeping the combat fast, so long as it's also deep, right? It also doesn't need to be deep, right? You can hide so many things underneath the hood as a GM, and you can play suboptimally, right, for your players, right? So, like, imagine you're playing. Let's talk about how sort of the combat and like balance a little bit works, right? You can play absolutely a chess game, right, at a grandmaster level, right? Taking lots of time, cranking out all of those like different what my players are going to do, right? And setting up all of your different strategies, or you can play chess at a very basic level,
Mm-hmm.
right? You can play it as a first-time players who are just basically learning the rules, and it's interesting and engaging at both of those levels, but it's not interesting playing a grandmaster as someone who's starting out,
No.
right? But right, so whereas like a lot of systems, they get you like in Pathfinder, a lot of the, or at least in first edition, you need to learn a lot of the crunch before you even like start to like delve into what's good or not in combat, right? And then with D&D 5e, that's less so, right? But like the wizard needs to go through all of the spells, right? Learn like to prepare and like then do a bunch of things, and then yeah, there's a lot of I guess um, there's some learning curve to both of those systems, but it's not as different as playing with someone who doesn't need to know what's going on at all versus playing someone who's absolutely an like tactical genius and having fun at both times, right? And as a DM, you can adjust with this system, you can adjust your style to fit both players, and you can hide as much as you want underneath the hood.
Okay, very good. Okay, so from that point then, where should we start? Where should we go? How do we land on this brilliant place?
So let's talk about one of the differences, right? That you're wanting. I don't use dice in the system, right? One of the reasons, right, that I don't use dice, right, in the system is because, well, I find that the dice are a little bit slow, right? Um, let's talk about what I use in terms of cards, and then let's talk about what I use in combat, because cards, and then there's cards that I use to regulate probability, and then there's combat, which is on a little bit of a different system entirely. So cards, right? If you have let's say a normal deck, right? What you can do is you flip a card over, right? You just flip a card over, and it's one card. It's the number is easy to keep track of, right? And you can put it down. You can immediately identify what suit it's at, right? And that means something different. You can see the number. It means something different.
Yep.
So literally, with this one action, you are taking a pre-randomly generated deck, right? So one of the reasons why I use cards is the random numbers are made before the session, right? Or they're selected before the session, and you don't have to make up the random numbers with a die roll during the session. So it's actually several seconds faster for every interaction that uses the cards, right? And then you can also have two different things of probability in there, which in terms of like technicalities, it gets you to 52, right? Possible scenarios in there, but it's easy to recognize that, right? It's not like a 52 roll system. It's like, oh, go for hearts, right? That's fast, right? Or, oh, go for diamonds, or, oh, go for above 10, or go for, or king, right? That snaps faster than a arbitrary, I don't know, you get a 48 on the die. Right? So in the like processing ability, since there's a color, there's a suit, and a number to the card, people's minds process it a little bit faster, just like they were to do it in poker or a card game. So that's one of the smaller like little things. So I use cards instead of dice. And then for combat, I actually use something different, right? I use a resource management / reaction system, right? Where there's a little bit of card use in combat, but it's very small. But this system is more about what kind of response do you have against this person attacking you, right? And how are they attacking you, right? From the beginning, right, I have a very similar action economy as Pathfinder or D&D, except when you like get down to it, I have this resource called Focus, right, which they can use to have bonus actions on top of the move and standard. Right. So an example is okay, I have my move and my standard, but first of all, I make the standard so that you can attack twice, or I can attack once with more aim potentially going for their head, so like I knock them out, potentially going for more damage, a weak point in the armor, things like that. Right, that's what the so is this is opening it up a little bit more. But then the bonus action. Let's say that I move up to an enemy, I attack them twice, but they dodge both times.
Yeah.
They dodge both times. Right. They use focus to dodge. Right. So they're actively choosing at this moment to dodge those 2 attacks. But they run out of focus in the end. Right. I can use my own focus to make bonus attacks as a bonus action against that target, right? To overwhelm their defenses and finally start hitting that rogue that is so elusive, right? But if I do that, then that leaves me open. I'm going an all-out of attack, and so now someone else, his ally, which is comes up to me next turn, I've exhausted all of my resources for like trying to catch this rogue. Now his ally comes and he smacks me on the head and knocks me out on the ground. So that's an example of, I guess, what you can do, right? But there's also things like reposition, which is an immediate action that you can move on someone else's turn to prevent a flank, right? You can set up range threatened areas, right? So you can shoot at people trying to move inside a sort of cone, right? Very much like if you've ever played like XCOM or are familiar with Overwatch kinds of things, you can take
a formless barrier you could use. I've currently got page 73 up currently, so
yeah. And then there's a lot of different but like every little action in there, right, is sort of managed by like a resource and then information that you know about your opponent. What are they trying to hit you? What are they trying to accomplish? Are they going to go for a big strong attack? Are they going to go for a grapple? What kind of defenses do they have? Or do they have lots of dodges? Do they have a shield? And each different defense and each different offense things that you have different strengths and weaknesses, right? And the system is also flexible enough to allow a person who has one big strength to adapt, to be conservative, and then expect something else from the other person and catch them off guard, even though their strengths might not align. It's like if I have lots of attacks, but they all do little amount of damage, and I'm going to have a problem hitting this person with a shield, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who's going to block and reduce that damage from each attack. But let's say I go for a grab instead, right? Grabs are easy to do with the system. I can force them to grab, right? Or I can force them to block my attacks, but then I can grab their shield and yank it off them so that they're open for further attack, or I can get my ally to do it, right? So there's a lot of it's almost like I guess a lot of my inspiration for how the mechanics work and the resources is fighting games, actually. Believe it or not, right? The fighting game you might think of like, oh yeah, that's real time, right? But every attack that you make in a fighting game is a commitment.
Yomi.
Everyone has a different property and everyone has a different answer, right? It's not like D&D, oh, it's like you move up to them and you attack them. There's a lot more interactivity in the system.
Speed or accuracy, distance, yeah.
And so that's what goes into that, right? And by taking out, like, I guess the die roll, right, in that, right, which I think is, it's almost necessary, right, in order to keep all of the information in someone's head and execute it quickly, right? Because if I have die rolls on the side, it's like, oh, they're doing combat, which is like a tactical intensive, oh, this person's kind of doing this. And then they're off to the side rolling dice, and then they're checking the number. And if people have a low attention span, then it takes them time to transition between the dice and the combat and what's actually resulting. It's like, I check a number, and then I come back. That's rolling the dice is not the thing that takes the time in combat, right? It's the overhead between resolving the mechanics and resolving your actions.
Yeah.
Right. It's the wizard wants to use the spell, right? He reads off the spell. He's selecting his targets, and now we sit through 20 seconds of the DM rolling all of the stakes, right? And in those 20 seconds, some people might forget what the spell does, right? Or to some extent, and then they need to reread the spell, right? Just a little bit. That doesn't take all that much time. But when you add it up, and when you realize that everybody at the table is waiting for this stuff to happen, then all of a sudden it adds up to combat being longer. Right? We can talk about different kinds of ways where I speed up lots of interactions in combat, but I guess what I would like to talk about is character design first, right? So let's talk about the rogue, right? Let's talk about a rogue, the agile, nimble, stealthy fighter, that kind of thing.
That's me.
What kind of strengths does he have over this fighter in this resource system? Let's say that rogues, they're evasive. They have evasion in D&D. They dodge and they take less damage from different things. They have a good reflex save. Now, instead of this, right, this probability system that I have, how about you just give the rogue more dodges, right? More resources that they can expend, right? And they have better dodges. But let's say that when they run out of dodges, they have weaker armor. They have less HP than this paladin over here. So there's now a strategy to deal with the rogue that people can form plan around. Exhaust the rogue so that you can get in a few hits, right? Whereas it might be the opposite way of the paladin. Hit him one time very hard.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I sort of balance that kind of thing. At the same time, right? But enough about combat, and there's all of that in the file, right? We can talk about multiple characters, right? One of the big innovations that I bring is having it easier to play multiple characters in a single game, right? I actually have rules for playing every module and every adventure as a squad or single person if you want.
Cool.
So you can play, like if you want, you can play your favorite 4 characters from, Final Fantasy, right? At one time, all interacting one another. Or you can play the big bad, right? Souped up, higher level character, right? And you can have both of these players play at the same table, right? The way that I resolve role-playing checks, right? Let's say stealth or diplomacy or the actual ones where not combat, we'll say, is I add a assisted check system with the cards. So one of the things that you can do with the cards is you can leave out checks on the board, right? You can leave out a perception check, or you can leave out different things. You can set them up like a board. And then you can passively add cards or remove cards from that board for assistance, penalties, or you can do, as a DM, check the conditions against the open hand of cards secretly without your players knowing. So let's say that the party is going through a dungeon, right? Back to that. A lot of people will roll perception in every room because they want to be searching for traps, right? And so they just roll all of those perception checks, and then everybody rolls those perception checks. What if we just completely got rid of that? What if we never needed to tell the players to roll perception checks, and what if they never needed to ask? What if they had a passive perception check on the board, right? D&D 5e also does a little bit of this, passive perception, right? But then all the DM does is when a trap comes into view, they have a card already, or a card or 2 cards already set up on that trap, right? And if the hand that the players have, their perception check, matches those cards on that trap, they see that trap. And if they don't see that trap. And so you can dynamically say, oh, you notice this trap here, oh, you notice this trap there, you notice that trap, without ever referencing their perception, without telling them to ever check, and you can just do it as they move through this dungeon passively. And so and then with multiple characters engaging in a conversation, then I have a whole assisted check system where for everybody assisting in the check who can assist in the check, they draw more cards to add to the hand of success. And that's quick. Instead, that's a lot quicker than everybody rolling, adding up their own modifier, and then talking back to the EDM. You just draw the leader hands, and then you draw an extra card, and you add that to the leader's hands, and then you resolve the check as a whole. So it's one check instead of everybody trying their own.
Excellent.
So there's a lot of different mechanical improvements that I put into the system just so I could make everything flow better, flow faster. And then I also add a lot of different depth to that, but we could talk about that later. And that's better. Depth is better read, right, in rules than explained directly, unless you want to be here for another hour.
Well, yes, I'd like to make sure that people, we can always even consider doing another session, but anything else that you want to make sure you added that, I know we've got, for example, quote unquote, 5 minutes left. Make sure I don't run out of storage for recording this. Don't want that to be a factor. So, anything else that you wanted to cover off that you think people are really going to like? I'm up to page 100, scrolling through so people can see. Pulled from the Sky, Module 1. I've gone through the quick start 3-part campaign, etc., the clues for the crash site, etc. Over to you.
So another big thing, right, that I emphasize. So with how mechanically, I guess I've changed up a lot of different things. This allows me, I guess, a little bit of the system can handle more stuff, right? The system can handle a siege. It can handle diplomacy. It can handle stealth. It can handle all of those different kinds of things. So I think my favorite module, right, which truly showcases my favorite adventure that I made that truly showcases the strengths of the system is Module 2. Right, which is called the Boss's Hairdo. It features a heist, right? You're a group of, you're an independent faction, and you're tasked with stealing something from a particular noble.
There's the bodyguard, there's the noble's army, there's the city guard, the scholars. There we go.
Okay, but there's a lot of other people who are there for their own agenda, right? And so it quickly comes into a information gathering / diplomacy / I'm convincing all of these other people that I want to help them, but I'm really going to backstab them all, or I'm actually going to help them because I like who they are. But it's a huge sandbox. And the best part about it is people can choose whether or not they want to lead a siege. They can choose whether or not they want to just be quiet, they want to be rogues, they want to sneak in, they want to all pick all of the locks, they want undetected, they want the illusions, the wizards to set up illusions, all of that kind of thing. They can do a siege, they can do it the subtle way, they can do it by literally making deals with everyone else if they want to do completely diplomacy. And then typically people do any ways in between, and I've had a lot of different ways parties have gone through that encounter. Some don't get into combat. Some get into an hour-long combat. Some, make deals with everyone. Some make deals with no one. It's there's a lot of flexibility there, and it can handle whatever they come up with. Even though there's potentially 50 people fighting at once, the system can do that. Even if there's a lot of different people doing diplomacy and talking in lots of different places of the map, it can do that, right? And it's fun in both ways.
Okay, cool. So I've gone back up to the top of having scrolled through everything. I think we cover over a lot of things there. Obviously, if you want to find out more stuff, please ask in the comments. I'm sure Alex will be happy to keep checking back and adding stuff in as well. Not only just into the comments where you can put your own links in, I'll try and put stuff in the description. There are occasionally competitions, so please do check through via Linktree as well. They are time sensitive. You can also head over to Instagram. There are over 2,800 posts. Aside from that, please do like, obviously subscribe if you haven't already, hit the notification bell for any perhaps updates relating to this, maybe a playthrough, get that into the shot at some point. As well as that, you can also of course share, so please do make sure you do that. And like I said, thanks very much for watching, and for now, bye for now Alex, and back to the table.